Hi, I'm Rocco Stano, and welcome to StoryMakers. Today, we have with us Lesa Cline-Ransome. Welcome, Lesa.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Rocco. Nice to see you.
You have written so many books, but we're going to be focusing on Finding Langston, Leaving Lymon, but especially Being Clem. And the reason we're doing that is because they're sort of connected, aren't they?
Yes, they're a set. They're a trilogy.
They're a trilogy.
Yes.
So what's a trilogy?
A trilogy is 3 books that are connected, usually by a theme, but mainly the characters. They're all connected by place and setting, but they're connected to each other because they all know each other.
Being Clem's the last book in this trilogy because it's the third book. And so tell us about it.
Being Clem began with the very first book, Finding Langston. We first meet Clem in 1946 at Haynes Junior High School, where he's actually Langston's bully. He is friends with Lymon and another character named Errol, and they bully young Langston in the schoolyard. But he eventually becomes Langston's first friend in Chicago. Now, here in his own book, Being Clem, Clem is struggling a little bit. He's smart, he's likable, but he is trying to discover himself. He's Clemson Thurber Jr. to his mom, he's Clementine to his older sisters, he's CJ to his cousins, and he's Clem to his friends Errol and Lymon. But he's trying to figure out which one of these he really is. He's kind of living in the shadow of his father, who has deceased and has died in the Port Chicago disaster. His father was a brave hero and sailor, but Clem doesn't feel so brave. He's afraid of swimming. He's scared of just about everything. So he's trying to figure out how to be brave, how to be a young man in 1946, but he's not quite sure how.
You mentioned the Port Chicago disaster. What was that?
Well, that was a really interesting part of my research that I discovered, and it was a very little known part of history where African American sailors were asked to load ammunition during World War II in the San Francisco Bay, and they were loading very dangerous explosives onto ships. And then there was a huge explosion, and over 200 African American sailors died. And it was called the Port Chicago disaster. Mm-hmm. And Clemson's father would have been one of those men who died during that disaster.
I guess these books are considered historical fiction.
Yes. So what I do is I go back, I research, I take pieces of history, and then I build stories around them. So I'm using the truth, and then I fictionalize characters. I make up characters, and then I have them live in real parts, real pieces of history.
You did research for the 1940s. Was there anything that you really found interesting and wish you lived back then?
Well, there's a lot about the 1940s that I loved. One of the things I really loved is, I love music. And so I loved many of the musicians who performed during the 1940s. I loved Cab Calloway and Muddy Waters and Duke Ellington and Ella Fitzgerald. I loved their music. So for that part, I would have loved to be listening and being a part of the music scene in the 1940s. I also actually loved the clothing. Clothing was phenomenal.
The cover of Being Clem, there's like a sort of a family connection with the cover, isn't there?
Well, it's kind of funny you mention that because my husband, James Ransome, is the illustrator of many of my picture book titles, but he's also the illustrator of all 3 of the books in this trilogy. And each cover is very, very different and represents the characters really well. So for Clem, Leaving Lymon, and Finding Langston, they each have this really distinct cover, all done by the same illustrator. It's a challenge sometimes as an author. So I am a female author, and yet I'm writing about these young black boys in history. And so here I am, a woman, but I have to write from the perspective of a young black boy. So sometimes I would go into the studio and I would ask James questions about what it felt like to be a boy. And he would answer lots of questions for me. And you know who else helped me? Was my son. I'm a mom to 3 fabulous daughters and 1 great boy. And so I would ask him questions. And I also remembered what he was like as a young boy. And that really helped me in writing boy characters.
Mm-hmm. In the trilogy, each book focuses on a different character. And so how are the characters alike and how are they different?
Well, it's interesting because in the books, Langston and Lymon and Clem have a very complicated relationship. Mm-hmm. Langston and Lymon are not friends at all, but they're so much alike in so many ways. Actually, all 3 of the boys have very deep roots in the South. They have family members that are all from the South. They all live in Chicago. They have all experienced loss. Langston has lost his mom. Lymon has lost his grandfather, who's helped to raise him. And Clem has lost his father, as we talked about in the Port Chicago disaster. But that doesn't make them friends. The ways in which they are different is that Langston is a boy who is kind of quiet and introspective, and Lymon is really angry and hurt. And Clem is smart and funny. In another time, in another place, maybe they could have been friends, but they're all very, very connected in so many ways.
So Lesa, you have me thinking, about writing a trilogy. And if I were to write a trilogy, what would I write about, or who would I write about? They always say you should write about things you know, or you have to do research, and you found out things about the 1940s that you didn't know. Is there something that you were surprised about in the 1940s?
Oh, absolutely. I discovered a lot about the Great Migration, about that period in history where millions and millions of blacks left the South and came north for better opportunities in the 1900s. So that was a great learning experience for me. It was almost like relearning history.
Well, I bet our viewers will find this to be a challenge, but I'm going to offer them this challenge to think about creating a trilogy. And they can pick a time period. They can figure out how their characters are connected. And they can share that in the comments section, the time period and how the characters are connected. So it was so much fun chatting with you today. And, we have the 3 books, Finding Langston, Leaving Lymon, and Being Clem. And these are books, but they're also available in audiobooks and ebooks, aren't they?
Absolutely. And the audiobook is recorded by an amazing voice actor named DION Graham. His voice is magical. And I have to tell you, I did something for the first time that I'd never done before. I actually recorded the author's note on all 3 of those books.
Oh, was it difficult?
It was a little scary, but also incredibly fun.
You'll have to come back and next time bring James.
I absolutely will. That would be fun.
It's always fun.
Yeah.
And remember, until next time, read a book in any format.